Cloud. Okay, we're continuing with the halachas of in Kitzur in chapter 80. Bring up the original text. Dealing with different laws of the Melachos of Shabbos. And try to do our best to get through this as easy as possible. Okay. Let's see if they're showing the page yet. Hold on. Okay. So we're holding law number 18 of it's not exactly the laws of making coffee, but we'll get to the laws of making coffee after the law. It says mashke kafe sheyesh betachti. Aaron's coming. Hey, Aaron, we're starting 18. So it says like this. We're gonna get into the coffee, even though it's not specifically I'm making coffee, but we're still continuing with the psolis, the waste. So if anyone is familiar, there's a coffee that we drink here in Eretz Yisrael called Turkish coffee. And for instance, I have a glass of it right here. So if you can see on the bottom, there's you put in the Turkish coffee and you let it drop, and you drink the coffee and you leave the waste, right? So the coffee sits as a waste. So that's the specific questions of this law. So mashke coffee sheyesh betachtisoy hakofi mamish shehu psoilus. It has some sort of substance that is a waste, like I have over here. So when I finish this coffee eventually, I will spill that out and throw it out. V'chein shar mashke sheyesh betachtisoy shmorim oy shar psoilus, or other drinks that have shmorim, which are like the dregs or other kind of wastes, kishem irin oisai. So when you pour it, it kind of clears off. So the problem, and again, is the waste? What do we do with the waste? So it says shrichem nizar shlei la'aras kol hatzalu. So one has to be careful not to drink the entirety of the clear liquid. Let's say in this case the coffee, which means the drinkable liquid. It doesn't have to be clear. Eliyashim ma'at etzel psolis, leave a little bit with the psolas, with the waste, and we'll see in a second in the footnotes why. Again, we said we know the psolas is also there's the issue of muksa, there's also the issue of boirer, of separating. The chalav shahamad, also if you have milk that turned into butterfat. Also likleit mashal maila nikra smetin. You can't scrape off the top, which is like a butterfat. So if you're taking off the butterfat as a butter, so you can't take off all of it, only what you want now, and don't take off all of it, leave a little bit with the base. To leave some on the bottom. Let's see what the law is over here. So it says in footnote number 82, must leave. When you pour off the clear liquid, again, the clear liquid in this case is the drinkable liquid, and leave the psolas, meaning the waste, some of the liquid remains mixed with the psolas. So the psolas doesn't become dry, right? Just because you drank out the last drinkable drop, you have still the liquids that's within the psolas itself. Pouring out these drops constitutes bora. If you're going to pour out these last drops of that's sitting in the psolas itself, right? So like I showed you before my glass, if as I get to the bottom of it, there's some liquids that are mixed, it's not dry, the bottom. So when you take out the last drops of it, that's considered bora. You're separating the good from the bad. So it is not considered bora when the other water is poured out, because according to the Chazon Ish, the other water was considered separate from the sediment, and the bora applies only to the drops mixed within the sediment. Mean to say is that the top liquids on top of the let's say the waste on the bottom, so that was separate all the time. It's only when you get to the end of it and you're trying to take out the last drops that is mixed in, that constitutes bora separation. Yes, Aaron.
Are we worried about throwing it away, or are we just worried about drinking the last drops?
Well, it's a very good question because that when we talk about when we talk, it's a very, very good question because in general there's a concept of muksa. Once you finish when something is no longer usable anymore, but especially if you couldn't eat it, we'll get into that in a second about what's the view of ground coffee if it's considered, let's say, edible before. Or let's say, but this milk that's on the bottom, I think buttermilk separates. I think the bottom part becomes sour, undrinkable. But over here, he's specifically talking about boirer, that you're separating because you're literally pulling out the last drops from the waste, and that's separation, which you're not allowed to do on Shabbos.
Okay.
Number 83, the Mishnah Brura and the Igli Tal rule that if you pour it off to drink immediately, you may even pour out the last drops. Because we did talk about taking good from bad, that at the end of the day, is taking good from bad is allowed. So here you're taking the good from the bad. So if you're taking it out to drink right away, so according to the Mishnah Brewer, he's lenient to say that it is allowed. Okay, we're talking about if you're trying to get out, your annoying last drop of coffee. So it's not like it's so difficult to be stringent in this situation. Okay, so here we're talking about in the case of butter fat, which is on top of the milk. Just my grandmother told me a family story that when she survived the war as hiding out in the city Klosenburg, known as Cluj today, and so after the war she was more or less healthy, and she went to help out in the Berlin hospitals, and that's where she met my grandfather, who did go through the camps, and she said literally that he was getting a lot of the survivors got very sick after the war. Although they were able to survive 9, 10, a few years during the Holocaust, it was afterwards when the body kind of settled down they got very sick. Some of them died. And she said that she nursed him back to health through the butterfat. He got, I think, some sort of lung disease. Okay, so he says the butterfat. So he said number 84. This is the halacha with regard to cream on top of the milk. See, the cream that comes on top of the milk, so that cream you can't separate. It's also by separating. 85, or you can take a little bit, but you have to leave some, as he says, not to remove it all. So he said, no, so you can only take what you can eat right away. You may take it all if you take some of the milk with it. So according to the Achronim and the Mishnah Brura, if you take some of the milk, because the milk could be drinkable, so then it's not a problem. Number 86, hold on, Aaron, let's just finish the footnote. Okay, you may remove this. Okay, now so there's the butter fat, there's the bottom of the coffee. Then you have sometimes if you have a milk that there's that kind of membrane, skin membrane that kind of forms on top of dry milk. So that's not butterfat. So it says you may remove the skin-like membrane that forms on boiled milk in order to drink the milk, if you don't want to obviously drink the membrane, because it where is it? It forms on boiled milk in order to drink the milk because it too is edible. Means you could eat if you like the membrane, so it's not taking away waste, and it's separate from the milk itself. Cream is different, for it is wet and separate from and not separate from the milk. So according to Moshe Feinstein rules that the skin is less of a problem than the butterfat because the skin-like membrane is edible, where it seems like evidently the milk underneath the butterfat is wet with the milk, so it's proper separation. Where this is a dry substance, which is less of a separation. Yes, Aaron.
Oh, what about if you make cheese by putting vinegar and boiling milk?
Say that again.
Okay, so my wife, they did it in Syria. You boil milk, I think, and then you put like vinegar in it, and then it
Mhm.
curdles and it makes a cheese-like substance.
Okay.
So how does that work? Because I think it's more loose, and I don't know.
We're going to learn that in further laws. That's a problem of Baina. To make cheese on Shabbos
No,
is
but what about making butterfat? You don't make it on Shabbos, but then why wouldn't you separate it before Shabbos? And I'm
I,
saying,
Okay, that's a good question. If you could separate, but I guess that I think it stays in on the top, and that's how you keep it.
Okay, and I think I don't know exactly, but it might be the same with his cheese. They just, makes like a cottage cheese.
Could be. I have to check into it. Could be. I wanted to get into over here the question that Rebecca you asked last week about making coffee. So I'm going to first bring up the simple Chabad Online question on coffee. Oops, nothing simple. Oh, here we go. Here we go. So how do I make coffee on Shabbos? All right. So how do we make coffee on Shabbos? What's the obvious question? Obvious question is you have your how do you, the different types of coffee and is it considered bishul? So there's a few rules over here. Do we can do the coffee beans? There's a lot of machlekes over here. It's not simple. The coffee beans are most people or a large amount of people do not use unbaked or what do they call it? Roasted coffee beans, right? You roast the beans and then you grind the beans. So the roasting is a kind of cooking. So that's called bishul. So the rule is the ein bishul acher bishul b'davar yavish. And something that's dry, you can't. There's no double. You can't cook after you cooked it. So it's already been cooked. The question is if it's considered cooked. The question is if that rule applies to coffee, and the question is also if coffee beans themselves are considered a food on their own. Can you eat coffee beans? I mean, we know we have the coffee candies. Some people have chocolate covered coffee beans. Is that considered a food? It seems like it's machlokes between the Ashkenazim and the Sephardim. But let's first let's just we said we're going to discuss this question. So let's first see the Chabad.org for the simple question. Question: how can I make a cup of hot coffee on the Shabbos when cooking is forbidden? So the simple answer is to make an instant or pour over coffee on Shabbos. You set up the hot water urn before Shabbos. That's obvious, right? So you don't turn on the hot water on Shabbos. So that you're not actively boiling the water on Shabbos, which is a prohibition. Cooking, however, can still occur by pouring boiling liquid over food, even after it has been removed from the heat source. So if you're going to take the hot water out of the urn is sitting on the fire, on the blech. And now you're taking the urn and you're pouring it on, so that's still a kli rishon is mevashel, cooks. Hold on, let's just finish reading. Avoid cook after it has already been removed from the heat source. Avoid cooking the coffee by making sure that the water has lost its full cooking ability by transferring it to another cup, which is called a kli sheni, which we learned about, or vessels before before it hits the coffee grinds. Okay, so now we go to specifics. Yes, Aaron.
Anytime I go to 770 on Shabbos, they always have coffee, but they
They have
try to
brewed.
get what?
They have brewed coffee.
No, they also have they have instant coffee. You put a little bit in your cup, but then there's something about using a second cup. Don't pour it
Okay, so
exactly
so so,
over.
so we're going to see that right here. Yes, Rebecca. We're going to get to that question right
Um,
here.
well, I guess I had a similar question. You're talking about coffee grind, but what if it's instant coffee?
Okay, let's first finish here. This is literally the ABCs of coffee making on
Okay.
Shabbos. So to make instant coffee on Shabbos, you'll need like this. Set up the hot water urn and boil the water before Shabbos. Number one, okay, that we figured out. Number two is pour the boiling water from the urn into a completely dry. Why I say completely dry? Because if you're going to pour it into a wet cup, then the first wet, there's definitely bishul acha bishul and davar lach, right? So if the cup has liquid in it, so by pouring the hot water directly into that cup causes a problem by cooking that, heating up or cooking that liquid that's been in the cup. So you have to find a completely dry, clean cup. That's step number two. So that goes to your question about you taking it from the urn, that's the water is the receptacle, that's called the kli rishon, where the receptacle where the water is, and you're putting it into a second cup. Already now it diffuses its ability to cook. Pour the water from that cup into a second cup. Okay, so that makes a kli shlishi. So the kli rishon is the urn. The kli sheni is the first cup. You put it into a second cup, which is the kli shlishi. According to all opinions, a third cup does not cook. Add your coffee and tea as well as milk or sugar to this cup. So if you want to know how do you make a max what do they call it, taster choice instant coffee on Shabbos, or if you're using the other stuff, so then you take it from the kli rishon into kli sheni into kli shlishi, which is the second, and
So
then
wait, so
you
wait,
add.
I
It says over here you add the coffee, tea, and milk and sugar to that.
wait. So you have cup one, pour
Cup
the
one is
water.
already cup one is already called cliche.
Right. So put the water in cup 1, then pour it into cup 2, and then
Yes.
put your stuff into cup 3, and then pour the water into cup 3.
No, he doesn't say that. Then you could put the coffee into cup two.
So you have to put the water in first.
First tons of water, because then you'd be pouring from a klisheni, iri klisheni. Is the way it works is in the chain of command of cooking, is that the pouring is in between the two cups. The heat of the pouring is in between the two cups. So if there's let's say the kli rishon, if you were, for instance, to put in coffee into your dry cup and open the urn and pour it right on, so then it's iroi kli rishon. That's much stricter. Your mamish cooking from a kli rishon. If you put it into the cup, so now it's in a kli sheni, and then you add the coffee to that cup, it's less than if you would have had the coffee in there before. But in our case, he's saying you first then put it into a second cup. So now that's a cliche. You don't have to, and again, you shouldn't be pouring it from the first, the substance shouldn't be in the second cup. The dry food, the dry coffee and the sugar, whatever, what have you, should be first you put it into the second cup and then add it so you don't have the iroi, the pouring from cliche into klishlishi. Yes, Rebecca.
Why is it that
By
the
the way,
urn?
hold on, Rebecca. Some people are less careful about that. Some people will have the coffee and sugar in the second cup when you pour it in. Here he's saying it's better to have it first the water and then put the coffee and sugar in. Yes,
But
sorry.
is that allowed to first put in the coffee, sugar, or whatever, and then
Because
the water?
in most opinions, a cliche anyways is not mavashal. Here you already have it in a cliche in the first cup. So now you're being irui cliche. Irui means a
Okay.
pouring from the cliche.
A
So it's
lot of like when I go to places with from people, a lot of the time I see people first putting in the coffee.
yeah. So then here,
Um,
Rabbi, this is based on Rabbi Farkash, who says best is to have it first in a klishlishi and then adding in the coffee and sugar.
okay. So my question is, why is it if the issue is that the water you can't if the water is very, very, very hot, then it's like cooking, then why is it that the urns that are made by the from companies here, the water in those urns is like so much hotter than the urns that you get in like a regular non-Jewish store. It's like the in the from urns, the water is like constantly boiling. It's like always boiling
Yeah,
temperature.
well, the Shabbos mode, like this, what they created with Shabbos mode is that there's for the again for the laws of electricity and Shabbos, they have in such a way where it's not it maintains a certain heat in order that it shouldn't be reboiling. You don't want the reboiling. You want to so it stays hotter. But again, according to all opinions, although yes, today you can make a coffee that even the this in the shul that I daven in Tzemach Tzedek, even after a kli shlishi, means even if I have the first cup, the first is there, and then I have the second and the third cup, it's so hot that I need to double the cup. I can't hold the bigger.
Right.
So, but the
So
fact
why
is,
do they make it so hot?
well, because there's something about you have to there's in the laws of Shabbos in order to keep because the temperatures that drop in a non-Shabbos mode, the temperatures are dropping and elevating the entire time. So there's a reboil and a reboil and a reboil, and you can't reboil.
But
But okay,
I think in the non-Jewish urn, like you have to push a button to get it to reboil. Oh no, sorry, it's a from urn. You have to push a button to get it to
And
reboil.
now on Shabbos you can't push those buttons. Yes,
Right,
Aaron.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
what I want what I wanted to say to her was the reason that a lot of the
Rebecca.
reason why, Rebecca, that the water is a lot cooler in the non-Jewish urns is because there was a lawsuit and someone spilled coffee on them and burned themselves, so
Yeah,
they had to lower the temperatures.
I don't know if that was I'm not sure that's the reason,
No,
but
but all the stores, if you go to them, they will lower the temperature of the coffee by enough so that it can't get sued. But
I just wanted to correct you. It's not called a Jewish and non-Jewish. It's a Shabbos and non-Shabbos. It's a
okay,
question.
whatever. That's what she said. Okay,
Yeah.
my question is this: tea is a whole separate issue because if you pour
We're
water,
going to get to tea in a second. I'm going to bring up all
okay.
the things that I put together for this.
Now,
All
if I make coffee, now let me just ask you. Okay, so I have a Shabbos mode thing, and I make fresh tea. I mean coffee, and then the next day I don't have to worry about any of this.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. Let's first do this is what's called the ABCs of regular coffee based on Shabbos Kehilchatah from Rabbi Kasil Farkash. Okay, that's so we covered instant coffee. What about pour over coffee on Shabbos? You'll need like this. Pour over coffee is the problem is because here you're putting the beans and you're pouring on top of the coffee in the
So that's
liquid.
like the Turkish coffee?
No, because no Turkish coffee, you leave the Turkish coffee in the cup. Turkish coffee different than instant is that the like see like I said in pour over coffee you don't have this
Oh,
you understand? So here you just put in the Turkish coffee and you pour in the hot water and it sits on the bottom. The pour over coffee is in a filter, right? And the liquid comes through the filter. Okay. So he says up here. So how do you make pour over coffee on Shabbos? You'll need like this. Set up a hot water urn, like we said before Shabbos. Pour boiling water from the urn into a completely dry and clean cup, like an instant coffee. Pour that water, the water from that cup into over your. Oh, okay. So now he says like this. I have to make sure that I'm taking it from Chabad.org. I thought he would have to put it into Kli Shlishi before, but he says no. You take it from the Kli Sheni, and you pour the water from the Kli Sheni, which is the first cup, from that cup over your cup of grinds. I'm just reading what it says in Chabad.org from Rabbi Farkash. Allow the water to filter on its own into the second cup and add milk and sugar. French press timers and other methods of making coffee are beyond the scope of this discussion, so talk to your rabbi. I'm not sure if there's a mistake here, but I'm not sure why you would not put it into Kli Shlishi. If instant coffee you do, then why not in the pour over coffee? But let's just before we get to, let's go to the OU. The OU says like this: brewing pre-ground coffee on Shabbos. Okay, so the coffee is obviously you can't grind coffee beans on Shabbos. So we're not talking about grinding the coffee beans even by hand. You can't grind coffee beans on Shabbos. So you already grounded it. You bought pre-ground coffee beans. So the OU says like this: may one brew a cup of coffee on Shabbos using pre-ground coffee? Okay, so ground coffee is made from roasted coffee beans. That's number one. Like I said before, roasted means halachically it's bishul, it's already cooked. Rabbi Vadi Yosef, which is an opinion of the Sephardic from the Sephardic community, Olav Shalom, Harav Vadi Yosef, writes that roasted coffee beans are considered edible. So not only is it cooking, but it's also edible. So if it's edible, it's ochel mitoch ochel. It's food from food. This is also the opinion of many poskim, including Ginas Varadim, Rabbi Yaakov Emdin, which is Chassam Sofer. So this is not just Ashkenaz Sephardim, but other rabbis who hold that coffee beans are two things. One, it's considered roasted, it's considered cooked. And number two is that it's edible. The beans themselves, the ground themselves is edible. However, not all poskim agree with this. For example, Pri Megadim, which is another authority, writes that although coffee beans are roasted, means it's ready cooked, they are not fully edible. Yabia Omer cites other poskim that are also strict regarding this matter. Yabia Omer is a Rav Avad Yosef. Okay. If we accept that coffee grounds are edible, there's a basis to be lenient to brew coffee on Shabbos because ein bishur achal bishur, because the coffee beans are already roasted, so it's already bishul. You can't cook them again because it's already been cooked. There's no prohibition to cook foods which have already been cooked. However, this principle may not apply to ground coffee because Rabbi Lezer Mimitz maintains that yesh bishul acher afia. The question is that when you change the type of cooking, the first time you cooked, you baked. Roast is a form of baking. Now it's like, for instance, if you go from baking to cooking, that's not the same thing. To double cook something, bishul, that's not that's not possible on Shabbos. But from bake to cook it, maybe it is possible. So there's opinions that say that although the beans have been roasted, by pouring the hot water on it, you're doing a separate type of cooking as opposed to baking. One may not cook roasted foods on Shabbos in hot water, since dry roasting and cooking in liquids are two different forms of food preparation, and you're adding a new preparation on Shabbos. This concern applies to coffee beans, since the beans were originally roasted and now will be brewed. Brewed and roasting is not the same thing. There are other poskim who do not accept the position of Rabbi Elazar Mimitz, the Shulchan Aruch appears to be lenient to follow the lenient opinion, while the Ramah, which is the Ashkenazi authority, rules in favor of the more stringent view. Rabbi Vad Yosef concludes, Harav Vad Yosef, that Sfardim may pour hot water from a Kli Rishoy onto roasted coffee beans, because if it's already roasted, you know bishlach bishul, so you don't even have to do the second cup. You could take, you could put in ground beans in a filter and put it under the urn and pour the water straight on top of it. While Ashkenaz may only pour from a kli sheni, second utensil, which would be the first cup after the urn, which is a secondary utensil that was never heated on the fire. However, the Aruch HaShulchan forbids preparing coffee on Shabbos even in a kli shlishi. This seems to be the opinion of the Mishnah Brura, the Chafetz Chaim as well, possibly because he does not consider coffee beans to be fully cooked, as noted previous in halacha in a previous halacha yomis, whatever. Vigish Moshe disagrees with the Aruch HaShulchan and does not think any food can be cooked in a kli shlishi, even though it was once baked and now it's being cooked, roasted, and then cooked. Therefore, he would certainly permit brewing coffee with the kli shlishi. So we basically have with us three opinions. We have the opinion of Harav Vad Yosef, who says that because roasting is a form of cooking, and cooking and baking are the same thing, so therefore there's no way you could cook it again, and therefore even from the original urn you could pour the hot water. You have the opinions who say that you have to use a kli sheni, it has to go first to the second cup, and then you have the opinions who say that you can't even use a kli shlishi. And Moshe Feinstein says that if you use a kli shlishi, it's allowed to use the brewing. That's why I'm not so certain that Chabad.org, I have to check the original text of Rabbi Farkash, because Rabbi Farkash seems to have the opinion that allows, like we said before, to pour from the kli sheni right away into the ground coffee. So that would be kind of another opinion. Yes, Aaron.
Okay, two questions. I want to ask, before Shabbos, you do have a lot of coffee makers with timers on it. Could I set it before Shabbos to have my coffee brewed fresh when I get up, and maybe even grind it, drop it into the thing on a timer that I set up before Shabbos?
There's another thing called uvdin l'chol. We didn't get to that. There's a lot of variables when it comes to Shabbos. One is that there's the prohibition and the subs of the prohibition, and then there's what's called uvdin l'chol. Means that we have to make a shinui. We try not to make our Shabbos week like. Means even if it's not clearly a prohibition, but we avoid to make week-like things. So the idea of I have to check about pre-setting a machine for brewing and these things. First of all, then it's like setting a timer for cooking. It's different than, but in general, it would definitely fall under, I think, the issue of uvdin l'chol.
Then what's the difference? I mean, I'm just asking, what's the difference if a goyim, like in the shuls, the goyim is turning on the urn to boil the water or make the coffee?
They're not allowed to. They're not allowed to turn on their to boil the coffee unless they're turning around for themselves. And there's a Gentile is not allowed to make hot water for you on Shabbos, just a regular person, unless there's obviously a situation where there's an emergency, etc. But then when a regular person just have a coffee, you can't have someone make a hot water for you. Yes, Rebecca.
I know you're talking about coffee, but is all of this the same with like cocoa powder?
The question is over here, for instance, it seems like instant coffee from what I'm not getting clear is, unless I'm not understanding, the instant coffee, for instance, seems to be less of a problem than the ground coffee beans, right? Instant coffee, I think, is after you boil the coffee, you kind of take the residue from it and you dry it.
It's freeze dried.
It's freeze dried, so it's definitely been cooked. That's how it comes into being, right? So that's why I don't understand why Rabbi Farkash would say you should use a kli shlishi for instant, and you could use a kli sheni for ground. Means
Now,
go ahead.
but my question is even if you follow one of these rules to an nth degree, aren't you extracting flavor?
No, extracting that's not a problem because it's food from food according to most opinions. The problem is if you're cooking or not. The question over here is the cooking part. So here the cooking part is so the instant coffee is the instant coffee. He says clearly, put it into the second cup, which is called a kli shlishi. Remember, the urn is the first cup, first cup is the second cup, and the second cup is the third cup. So remember, though we call it the second cup, but the second cup is really the third cup because the urn is considered the first vessel. So let's call it vessel. The first receptacle is the urn, the second receptacle is the first cup, and the third receptacle is the second cup. Rabbi Farkas says to make instant coffee, you first pour the water into the second cup, not even from the second cup, and then pour the substance into the kli shlishi. Now that's because he's just being extra careful. Because a kli sheni also not, and the only way to make ground coffee is by pouring. So I'm assuming he's saying because a kli sheni is already, everyone agrees, is not cooking. The only reason we're saying to first put it in the hot water and then put it the coffee, the instant in the third cup is because you can do it that way, but no one puts you have to pour. The whole way of making ground coffee is by pouring. So therefore he's lenient and says you could pour from the second cup. That's what I'm assuming is the reasoning of his ruling. Let's just do the summary of the OU. And then I wanted to put something I put together myself. I'm not 100% sure it's accurate because what I put together now disagrees with Chabad Aruch says. It says over here, according to the poskim that consider roasted coffee beans to be fully cooked, this is the summary. So according to the poskim that consider roasted coffee to be fully cooked, meaning there is no difference between baking and cooking, Ashkenazim may brew coffee on Shabbos by pouring from a kli sheni, which is what Rabbi Farkash says. Pouring from a kli sheni on top of ground coffee because the beans have already been cooked. And Sfardim may possibly do so even from a kli rishon, based on what Rabbi Vad Yosef said, that because it's already it's cooked and it's edible, therefore there's no prohibition of using even a kli rishon, meaning, i.e., according to Rabbi Vad Yosef, you could put the ground beans in a filter, go under the urn, and pour it straight into the cup. Okay, according to poskim that consider roasted coffee beans not fully cooked, means by boiling the water, you are cooking it because the roast was not a full cooked. They may not be brewed on Shabbos at all. Means you're not allowed to brew unless, however, Igros Moshe permits in a kli shlishi. This goes really touching to your question of what Rebecca says, that the water is very, very, very hot, right? If you put in lukewarm water or not really hot water to coffee, it's just going to be like a bad mix. So it seems like Rav Moshe Feinstein is saying that there is no such thing as cooking a kli shlishi according to anyone, no matter what. So therefore, you could pour it from a kli shlishi, even though he holds that the most Ashkenazim agree that roasted beans is not considered cooked. I'm just going to go to my summary over here, and then we're going to move on. So he says like this. I'm not publishing this, but let's take the summary with a grain of salt. Kehilchatah is concerning making coffee on Shabbos. There's the issue. It's a very good breakdown for the Rebecca. You had a question? Your hand was up. Okay. There is the question of bishul, which is cooking. There's the question of kli rishon, sheni, and shlishi. Urn, first cup, second cup. Instant versus brewed coffee. Use of a filter, like that's what Aaron said. That's kind of bringing the liquid out, right? Changing its form. And the question that Aaron touched about could you set up a pre-grinding, which is tochen, to turn the coffee beans. So even if, let's say, according to Rabbi Harav Vad Yosef, right, the coffee beans have been roasted, they're totally cooked. What's the big deal to grinding them if you have a hand grinder? Because one of the prohibitions on Shabbos we're going to learn in a second is that even food that's already totally cooked, you can't grind it. One of the prohibitions on Shabbos is grinding.
But you could have it on a timer before Shabbos. I would never grind it on Shabbos myself.
So that's the question: if you could have a timer on Shabbos to do a melacha, not relevant, for instance, hypothetically, if you can you load the dishwasher and have a timer that's going to go on. Not relevant for instant coffee, but possibly for fresh beans. Okay, the grinding, obviously, we don't grind instant coffee. So let's first see instant coffee, which is known in Hebrew as Nescafe. Halacha, permit to pour hot water into instant coffee in a kli sheni or kli shlishi. Okay, this is like Aaron said and Rebecca said that you see a lot of people that have the coffee in the second cup, and then they just pour from the first cup into the second cup, which is from the kli sheni already. permitted to pour hot water into instant coffee in a kli sheni or kli shlishi because instant coffee has already fully been cooked during production. There is no concern of bishul acher bishul by dry items. Okay, this is not so clear. He's basically saying, like a Rabbi Avodia Yosef, that the laws of instant coffee would be like the same laws of ground coffee. And if it's the same laws that's fully cooked and there's no bishul acher bishul in dry items, so you could have the coffee already in the second cup, which the second cup means the first cup that the hot water goes into. The Alter Rebbe says cooked dry items, like instant coffee, can be recooked. So the Alter Rebbe says the problem is that you could sometimes cook dry foods. Therefore, we have to have the second. We either put it into the third cup or we pour it into the third cup. But we're machmer not to use a kli rishon unless it's still fully dry. And it's still fully dry, like we said. It has to be 100% dry. Rabbi Farkash advises using at least a kli sheni, preferably a kli shlishi, like we said before, that you put the water into the third cup, which is the second cup, the third vessel, to avoid any issues. Also because of appearance and possible leniencies regarding temperature, which is the question that Rebecca brought up. Yes, Aruch.
Okay, so you say you can cook a dry item?
The Alter Rebbe says it's not so simple about when something if there's bishul acher bishul in a dry item.
Because what you're saying is, I'm just using this as extreme example, but bread is dry, and then you could put it on your black and toast it.
No, but that's not a problem. To heat up the bread on Shabbos, it's not directly on the fire, but if you're putting it on an intermediary to get it hot, it's not a problem because ain't bishul acher bishul. That's
But
what
it doesn't just get hot; it gets
that's what we
toasted.
said. If the you bring a good question. You're saying that if it was baked, now it's being cooked, but it's not being cooked to the liquid. You're not putting the bread into liquid. If you're putting the bread on the hot plate, it's just a continuation of the baking. The question that they have is for the dry beans to go from baking to cooking. So it changes the form of cooking. Here to put the bread to heat up the bread in the permissible way, let's say on top of like we learned before, on top of an open pot or on top of a heat diffuser, right? So then we brought down that you could have that if you have totally dry solids, it's not a problem. The question is when we talked about the liquids on the chicken, etc. The Alter Rebbe does mention there could be a question of cooking after cooking. Therefore, means but seemingly what Rabbi Avodia Yosef says that you could pour from a kli rishon into a kli sheni with pre-ground coffee would apply to instant coffee if instant coffee is considered dry and cooked, right? Which it is. But the way we do it is at the end is either we pour it from the first cup into the second cup, which is with the coffee inside means when it's already in the kli shlishi, we're pouring it from the kli sheni into the kli shlishi. Or Rabbi Farkash, who says to be even more strict, which is to first put the water empty into the second cup, which is the kli shlishi, and only add to that the coffee. Okay, I'm just going through this because we want to go a little further. Yes, Rebecca.
I didn't catch what you said if you answered about the cocoa powder, if you want to make like hot cocoa.
Excellent. So the question is, I have to check. Let's see if it brings it up. I think the question of the cocoa is if it was a bishul done already or not.
But my question is about the cocoa is that if you have real cocoa that's unsweetened, you can't eat it. You literally can't eat it. So you have to add sugar and stuff,
Yeah,
and then you're cooking it.
for instance, how do we make cocoa?
But I'm talking about like the
The instant.
Ghirardelli one that's mixed with, it's
Yeah, the
like
hot
mixed
chocolate.
it's mixed with sugar already. It's like ready to eat,
Yeah, I mean,
ready to drink.
the question. No, the question. Listen, the syrup for sure is not a problem. Like not. I mean, obviously in a permissible way, not in a clean rishon. The syrup is just a dye or something. The question is if the cocoa beans in the instant cocoa is considered cooked before now. I guess it would depend on the question is how they make cocoa. Is cocoa is a form of chocolate, right?
So
So
cocoa has to be baked before. When you get the real bean, you have to peel it out of the shell and everything. When you get to the actual bean, they grind it, they bake it,
okay, so that's similar to
they roast it.
it's a similar question to the coffee then.
Yeah, they roast it the same.
So it seems like Rebecca, although unless I find that otherwise, that the instant cocoa would be similar to instant coffee.
Okay, thank
And
you.
I'll say this to you that at Chabad 770, they also have instant hot chocolate in one of the tub things that you can get.
Okay, there you go.
I make the joke that you can tell how religious a shul is by how big their coffee bar is.
Very nice.
And 770 has one of the biggest coffee bars.
Very nice. So let's just continue. Let's just finish this up quickly. So he says the procedure is pouring boiling water into a cup, which is a klisheni. Okay, from the first urn into this first cup is called a klisheni. Wait a few seconds to reduce the heat. Addressing Rebecca's question. Add instant coffee. That's if you're adding instant coffee to the first cup. So that's but we're careful to at least pour it into the second cup. Either pour it onto the coffee in the second cup, or to pour it in the second cup and add the coffee, using a klisheni or shlishi. Brewed coffee already prepared before Shabbos. Okay, this is another question. If you already pre-brewed the coffee, it's cold. Reheating liquid coffee that was fully cooked before Shabbos, if still warm, may be placed near a heat source, not directly on the blech or hot plate, unless conditions of chazara are met, which is if you could put something back. If cold, it means it totally cooled down. Then it's problematic because we hold there is bishul acher bishul in liquids, because the problem is that pre-brewed coffee is in ways even worse than dried coffee grind. Why? Because it's a liquid, and the liquid now is being reheated. Liquid can be cooked on Shabbos. So that's a problem. Farkash suggests avoiding reheating cold liquid coffee on Shabbos. Instead, prepare it in a thermos before Shabbos, which some people do. They have a thermos for Shabbos. Hold on, let's just finish this. Permitted drinking pre-brewed coffee from thermos, not permitted reheating cold liquids before coffee on Shabbos. Yes, Aaron.
Okay. There is such a thing called cold brew coffee. I have a brew.
If you drink cold brew, it's cold brew. You're drinking
No, but that's not my point. Can you make cold brew on Shabbos? Because I pour cold water over it, wait like 10 hours. So you do it on Friday night before you go to bed.
So that becomes the question of preparing something for a later point on Shabbos. We talked about that you prepare things right away. It's a good question. Let's see. I think he addresses it in this little sheet. Coffee bags and like tea bags, right? So halacha, treated like tea bags. Concerns of bishul and borer, if left to steep, then removed. Okay, there's a problem is that there's also, when we make tea, according to some opinions, you have to put it in the tea bag and take it out right away, not let it sit. Rabbi Farkash only allows in kli shlishi to use coffee bags. Do not leave in a cup and remove later. Then this is borer, separating. Dip a few times and remove immediately. Only in a kli shlishi and remove immediately. Do not steep or squeeze it. Squeezing, of course, another problem. Now here we go with Aaron's question. Cold brew coffee, already extracted before Shabbos. That's different. Can be poured and used freely on Shabbos. Obviously, there's no bishul because it's cold already. He doesn't say if you can make it. Coffee made with a filter on Shabbos. Example: pouring coffee over ground coffee, which we said before. Now here is where I think where I put this together, he made a mistake. Because here he says that it's not permitted, and we clearly learned from Rabbi Avad Yosef, even Rabbi Farkash says you're allowed to, he holds due to bishul, if you hold that there is bishul on dry, and borer. But so I have to check into this. Pouring hot water on ground coffee is actually cooking, not permitted. I don't think this is accurate information, at least not based on what Chabad Aruch says. Coffee pods, Nespresso, involves bishul, electricity, potential malbim heating parts. Groma, which is your thing, Aaron, setting up that things should be grounded on Shabbos. Groma means you're setting up something to be caused to happen, not permitted. Using ground coffee with cold water on Shabbos, in other words, making cold brew, okay, not advisable even with cold water due to the borer and uvda dechol. Like I said, you're doing a weekly thing. There's another thing is that you're creating something in a way of weekly. Shabbos, we try to not do things of weekly. Also possible of tochen. If you're grinding it, then there's also an issue. Best to prepare before Shabbos. The summary of this is: instant coffee is allowed on Shabbos. Use kli, sheni, or shlishi. Brewed coffee, if kept warm, do not reheat. Brewed coffee cold is not allowed because you're reheating. Coffee bags only in a kli shlishi, remove immediately. Cold brew made before Shabbos, no restrictions. Cold brew made on Shabbos, we don't do it because of borer or uvdin nechol. Filtered, pour over, and I don't think this is accurate. Coffee pods, bishul, electricity, obviously not allowed. Best practice for Shabbos coffee: prepare cold brew. Okay, we've done this from Chabad.org, and he brings the sources down if there's bishul acher bishul on dry items or not. Okay.
I'll just say what one Hasidic man told me he does. He says, I want to be a little more machmir. He takes 4 bags of tea and he makes it really extra strong. And then on Shabbos, he just adds the water to the already made strong.
Yeah, because he doesn't want to do any kind of the cooking. Yes, yes, Rebecca.
Um, okay, so you know how there's like an electric kettle with like a thing you push down that makes the water start to boil, and then when the water's boiled, it pops back up?
Say that again.
You know, there's like a hot water kettle, an electric hot water
Yeah,
kettle where you like you push the thing down and then it starts boiling. And then once it's fully boiled, it pops back up.
yeah. I mean, that's
So,
like that's turning on the electricity for the.
right. So, I was staying somewhere for Yontif, and the guy had that, and he told me to push it down and set it on a timer, but I didn't think you could do that even on Yontif. What do you think about that? So it's like being boiled at a time that you decided before Yontif, basically.
Basically, it's plugged into a Shabbos clock.
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of.
But it's Yom Tov, not Shabbos, right? You're allowed to cook. You're allowed to cook on Shabbos. So you're allowed to set a Shabbos clock for let's say a blech or a oven or a crock pot on Shabbos on Yom Tov. You're allowed to because you're allowed to cook on Yom Tov.
But
So that's not
on
that's not
Shabbos, can you do that?
Shabbos, you're not because that's good. That's definitely grum. You're causing it to. You're causing it to. This is Yom Tov. You're allowed to cook. The only question is that you don't want the water to be cooked now. You want it to cook later. So you're setting it up. The water's in there. The urn is in there. Everything's there. And you have the thing pushed down, and then the electricity sets on. Listen, I know definitely you're allowed to do it with the blech. I mean, with the blech and the crock pot. I'm assuming the same thing would apply to
But
the.
are you allowed to, when you do it with a black, are you allowed to put a kettle on the black to heat up the water, even if it doesn't boil?
We're going to learn later about a Gentile who heats up the house. This is a Gentile who heats up the house. So he's really heating up the house. Those days, the ovens and the stoves and the heaters were one system, right?
Right.
So he's heating up the house for someone for a reason. And so what they used to do is they'd put cold food on the cold surface of the heater, what have you. And then he would put on the fire, and then by chance that would heat up the foods. We're gonna get to
But
that later.
but I thought a Gentile can't turn on the stove for you.
Yes, but he's not turning on the stove for cooking. He's turning on the heat.
Oh,
It's,
okay.
it's that kind of
So I
uh,
could put my food on a heater.
but let's get to it. Holding
Okay,
there.
well, when we get to it.
Let's just finish this. He says like this. I trying to finish the summary. He says, okay. Kli Rishon Sheni Shlishi. So he says like this in the Siman 3:18:12. It says even if an item is fully cooked, the Kli Rishon has a status of cooking, according to some opinions. We are machmer not to pour from a Kli Rishon onto certain foods, even if cooked, because of visual concerns called maras ayin and possible reactivation of cooking. If you're scared, if we're worried that things could actually be cooked again. Borer, removing items from liquids, in other words, tea bags from coffee bags. Removing mixed items from liquids can be borer if the unwanted part is removed from the wanted part, right? If you're taking a tea bag out of the tea, you're taking literally the psoles, the waste, out of the ochel. You're not allowed to take waste out of the ochel. We learned last week. You have to take the food out of the tea bag. So if you dip it in quickly, it's something different. But if you want to let the tea bag sit in your tea and then pull it out, it's a question of borer.
So you could just drink it with the tea bag in it.
Or if you leave it in all the time, then you have to remember not to take out all the liquids, like we said before. So
Okay.
removing the coffee and tea bag after steeping is problematic. It must be removed immediately, not let to brew. Based on Rabbi Farkash Shabbos Kehilchatah, so just a little summary: fully cooked and dry instant coffee. Therefore, no bishul concerned. But he advises klisheni or shlishi to be safe. Again, this is based on Rabbi Avad Yosef, which means if it's dry and it's cooked, in theory, you should be able to pour it straight from the urn. Strongly recommends not to pour directly from the urn, Kli Rishon, even on instant coffee, which, like I said before, is even less problematic than ground coffee, because ground coffee, according to some opinions, is baked versus brewed coffee. Do not reheat cold coffee, even if it's previously cooked, because yesh bishul acher bishul and davar lach. If the coffee is still warm, it's a question of how warm it is and what you put it back. Coffee bags treated as the same caution as tea bags. Only kli shlishi must be removed immediately to avoid borer and bishul. Squeezing is usher because that's squeezing on Shabbos is forbidden. Okay, so this is basically a summary of what we learned until now. All right, let's stop here on that, and let's just do one more law in the actual original text. So we kindly covered a little bit of the issues. I think there was a mistake when he says you're not allowed to make cold brew, you're not allowed to make brewed, you're not allowed to make pour over on coffee. It seems clearly from Chabad.org. That was a mistake on my summary over here. But the question is, it seems like according to Chabad, according to Rabbi Farkash, we should never pour from a kli rishon directly on the coffee, preferably pour it like he says in the first, second cup, and then add the instant or pour it into the instant in the second cup. Okay. What about the famous problem, like Aaron raised last week, about if you have a fly that falls into your food? How do you remove it? That's a waste from food, and we're not allowed to take waste from food. So we're going to learn now the original text from the Kitzur, and I'm going to bring up what the Alter Rebbe says. What happens if a fly, which is a psolos, a waste? Remember, we learned the definition of waste is anything that you don't want now. Anything that you don't want now, even if you want it later, it's considered waste. As far as what we're talking about, the laws of Shabbos. It means you're taking something you want from something you don't want. So im nafels vuv, which is obviously considered waste. Falls into your liquids or to your solids. Lo yaser is vuv levada, you're not allowed to remove the bug from your food. If you take out part of the food, then you're taking food from food. It's not such a problem. Okay, that's the way the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says it. There's no footnotes on that. It seems to be straightforward. But in Chabad, we look always to see what the Alter Rebbe says, and the Alter Rebbe wrote the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law. On top of that, he has what's called the Siddur. The Alter Rebbe has halachas in the actual Siddur. This is the Siddur right here. And in the back of the Chabad Siddur, there's a few pages, maybe 4 or 5 pages, 3 pages really, that deal with the laws of Shabbos on top of the laws of the Shulchan Aruch. The rule of thumb in Chabad is that the Siddur is the final word. If the Siddur says something differently than what it says in the Shulchan Aruch, we go with the Siddur. And here the Alter Rebbe talks about certain things that we spoke about, which is eating seeded nuts. And here he says like this. I'm going to read the Hebrew. It says, the Alter Rebbe does not agree with the Kitzur. One should not use the leniency of taking out a spoon with a little bit of the food or the liquid with the bug. Like some people take a spoon, dip in a little bit, and take out the bug. Because it could literally be that there's a concern that if you don't do it right, you're going to actually be violating a raisa, a biblical law that's punishable by shogig to bring a sacrifice. And if you do it willingly with witnesses, you could be put to death for it. Therefore, the Alter Rebbe says the only way to do it is to pour the cup and until it falls out. What he does allow is you're not allowed to blow it out. Let's say you fill up the cup and you could just blow it off. That's not allowed either. What you could do, he says, is you could blow it until it gets to the rim and then pour it out. So according to Chabad, if a bug is to fall into your food, you cannot take it out from even with a spoon or fork with some of the foods. You have to kind of spill it out, even though that can make a mess or to lose some more of the food than you would like. Yes, Rebecca?
Didn't Rav Yosef Karo write the Shulchan Aruch?
No, we're saying there's the original Shulchan Aruch of Rabbi Yosef Karo, and then there's what's called Shulchan Aruch Harav, like we have the Shulchan Aruch of the Mishnah Brura. The Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch is called Shulchan Aruch Harav. So he composed a later version about the Rabbi Yosef Karo authored the Shulchan Aruch in the 1500s, and then based on that, there's all the commentaries, the Pri Megadim, the Shachan Taz, the Ramah, the Ashkenazic laws versus or customs versus the Sephardi customs. The Rabbi Yosef Karo was a Sephardi; he went according to Sephardi customs. So there's been over the years revisions of the Shulchan Aruch. For instance, the Mishnah Brura, which is the world accepted for the Ashkenazim, and we have a lot from Harav Vad Yosef. And Alter Rebbe also authored based on the additions of all the commentaries on the Rabbi Yosef Karo, including the Ramah, which is the Ashkenazic authority on that, to summarize it all, because there's some arguments that within the commentaries as well, between the Magen Avram, Pri Megadim, as we've seen, the constant disagreements. So he summarizes according to Chabad. On top of that summary, which is the Shulchan Aruch Harav, which is in depth, today it's accepted worldwide. It's not just Chabad. On top of that is the Siddur, but the Alter Rebbe is more careful as well. Has some additions on top of the Shulchan Aruch. Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, my question is what percentage of the Jewish population has to consider the food edible, where they'll say this is a cooked food?
It's a good question. I have to check on that. There's
Because, go ahead.
Yeah, this concept of minhag Medina, there's certain things that everyone agrees. There's certain things the Torah accepts that just a person wants to eat it, right? You have all these people online today, eating raw foods. It's not, that what one individual does, but there are different societies. For instance, when sushi was introduced, right, that was a new idea to eat raw fish. But today a lot of people are doing it, and carpaccios and different kinds of meats that are eaten raw, which once upon a time people were more careful with that. That's a good question of what defines. I think there's a certain rove. There's a certain understanding of what's considered unique behavior or standard behavior.
I'll just use this example. A lot of people say, and they even wrote a song about how hard it is to eat a lemon, but in my family, they eat lemons like oranges sometimes.
Yeah, I think we spoke about lemons last week. I think it's the Shulchan Aruch kind of looks at lemon as an addition versus a food.
Because they eat it like an orange, and they even have a sweet lemon, which they told me to try. For me, it's still sour, and my wife and my
I think the Shulchan Aruch kind of looks at a lemon as something that you add to food as opposed to food itself. All right, let's just do one more law before we stop. We're going to the laws of tochen, of grinding. If you want to add peppers or salts that are not ready, you have to kind of crush them. So mutter loduch bekata desakina ala shulchan. So you have to make two changes. One is you're not allowed to use the regular utensil to crush it. You use the end of the knife, which is not the way you would do it during the week, and you're doing it on the table or on a plate, not in its regular receptacle. Aval loibe meducha, you should not use a mortar, and loibe mach teshes, not a pestle or with a hand mill, and therefore you have two separations. You're not doing it in uvdin dachol. Let's see what the problem is, and then we'll finish off the class. The Kitzur Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Berurah 321-28 compare salt and pepper and rule that it must be crushed in a very irregular way, with two deviations from the normal procedure. So the two deviations in this case would be not using the hammer or the mortar, but to use the back of a knife, and not to use the pestle, but to use the table or a non-conventional receptacle, a plate or something. You may crush them with the handle of the knife on the table. So he says two deviations: handle instead of the pestle, the tabletop, or plate instead of the mortar. Pressing garlic should be done with two deviations if possible. See Shulchan Aruch Harav and the Minchas Shabbos. Meaning, if you want to crush, people have a squeeze for garlic. You're not allowed to use that on Shabbos. You're not allowed to use conventional utensils on Shabbos because there's also the idea of uvdin l'chol. We don't do things like in the week, so we always do a shinoi. Yes, Aaron.
Okay, so so two things. First, the pepper is like the coffee ground. You could use the back of a knife on a coffee ground.
Yes, you're right. You're right. That's a good point. In theory, that should be the same thing.
And now with the garlic, okay, you're not allowed to squeeze. So if you squeeze the juice out of the garlic to get the flavor, you're now making another.
Well, squeezing fruit directly into foods is allowed, but if you're not doing it directly into foods, you're right. I think he's talking about here in the case where the garlic is dry.
How can you get? It always has juice in it. It's like an orange. It's dry, but
I know, but like for instance, I don't know how they make garlic powder, but garlic powder is made in a way that it's dry. It dries out.
yeah, but you don't have to crush it. Garlic powder.
I know, but let's say you have big pieces of dry garlic and you could crush it, right? You could buy, by the way, in the store, you could have ground garlic and you could have
Correct.
Right?
Right.
Those are dry. So if you want to turn that into peppery or salty or a powdery kind of thing, you have the same problem.
Thank you.
Okay, so in 89, it is forbidden to cut them very fine with a knife blade if you want to cut them. Peppers, spices, to put in the food for immediate use is permitted according to the Vilna Gaon, etc. 90 says, or with a hand mill, salt or sugar that were pre-cooked and is considered pre-ground may be crumbled by hand if they get lumpy because of humidity. See, say Shari Tshuva and Rama. Okay, by hand, but not through machine. All right, this is going to stop. We're going to stop here and we start next week from law number 21. Any questions before we complete this class? All right, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And Ariel, I think you need to get some sleep.
Yeah, soon, a little later. Yeah. But no, but it's all right. I was listening and following.
You were taking everything in. Very good.
No,
Okay.
he
Thank
did.
you.
No, yeah, you're welcome.
Okay,
Thank you, Rabbi.
Take care.
Yeah, at least I got 3 people on.